Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, the very first edition of our show. You've got two co-anchors today. We haven't seen each other than these online platforms, and I swear it's been like 4 months since I've seen my good friend Edgar. But Edgar Zazueta is here with us. He's ACSA's Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. Edgar, you didn't even wear a jacket today, so you know the format's going to be different.
It's 104 degrees in Sacramento. I thought about it for a second, but yeah, I decided not to go there.
So folks, for those of you who are watching, and we thank you so much for watching, this show is going to be a little bit different. We are going to focus on advocacy and governmental relations. That's what we're about here and why Edgar brings his expertise. We also both have an opportunity to see any questions that you submit. So we invite you to send in questions and we will answer them as best as possible. If we don't answer your question, it's not because we don't like you or like your question. It's just that maybe we don't have the correct answer for it and we don't want to wing it. So it'll at least help guide us as we move into next week's edition. And of course, we'll be here Wednesday at 1 o'clock every week. And the other thing is, this is live television, so you really have no clue what's going to happen. We did this show a couple of weeks ago, Edgar, when we had the May revision, and you and I were clearly not the stars of that show. That was all about your son, who clearly was tired of you talking on the.
Oh yeah, I tried to bribe him to see, given that he seemed to be a hit, to see if he wanted to come on, but I think he's still tired about hearing about the budget. So he had better sense to stay away from the interview now. Yeah, he's busy doing more important things than listening to us talk.
There you go. And so with it being live television, some things are going to happen that we didn't plan for. We'll have other ACSA staff at times join us because we have the capacity to bring 2 and 3 people on. We'll also have that moment where we have a mystery guest that Edgar and I have not planned for, and all of a sudden just pops up on our broadcast platform, which again is going to make things easy. So again, we thank you for joining us. I'm going to get to these school reopening guidance documents, and I'm going to refer to one of the platforms that we're actually on right now, which is Facebook. And I've always kind of talked about how there are some elements of Facebook where it just gives people the opportunity to scream about something without having the 140 character limitation. And we've had a number of people talk on Facebook over the last week or so, all over the state, about how they're not hearing about how their schools are going to reopen. They're not hearing from the superintendents. They're not hearing from the principals. And now we're starting to hear some information that's coming out. We got that information from the CDC last week, which, Edgar, you and I were on a call with educators, and they weren't necessarily happy about what came out. Not so much. We're still waiting for California Department of Public Health to come out with theirs. Have you heard a timeline?
We're expecting something soon, and I'm always cautious of giving a definitive timeline because it's a moving target. But I would say that we should expect some statewide guidance. I'm going to go out and venture to say in the next couple of days. Okay. I think that's a safe assumption that at least that's the best information that we've received, that there will be some guidance coming out from the California Department of Health, and subsequently the California Department of Education is also working on some guidelines.
We did have, over the last 24 hours, something come out from the Los Angeles County Office of Education, a planning document. For those of you who don't know, LACO, they represent 2 million students in that Los Angeles County area, which is 1/3 of the state's public school population. I went on the LA Times today and just pulled a couple of pieces out of that planning document. And Edgar, I know you've probably read so much more, because this is a 45-page document. So clearly there's going to be more than these 6 points that I give you.
Right.
16 students to a class. This is not set in stone, of course.
Right.
16 students to a class, one-way hallways, students having lunch at their desks, masks being required, staggered school days, and something about every student gets a ball and they only get their ball to go play at recess. What are you hearing? What are you seeing and your view?
Yeah, and so what we saw from the LA County Office of Education is just the latest, and obviously it's going to get a lot of notoriety because it's LA County, our most populous county. Obviously, it's going to get a lot more media attention. Some of the biggest districts in the state are part of that county. But frankly, what came out of LA County today is reminiscent of the work that most counties, frankly, around the state are actually doing and putting together their own work groups. In terms of thinking about what are some guidelines that we're going to put forth and to ensure that there is some consistency. One thing that comes to mind, and the weeks all blur, and it could have been a couple months, could have been a couple weeks ago. Frankly, I don't remember, but we all will remember the uproar that the governor's infamous comments about what school may look like whenever we came back, and at the time, the perception is that maybe the governor was riffing, that maybe he was just talking off the top of his head there. The irony here, maybe it's not ironic. I think it's, and this is credit to the governor, that he was basing some of this on best available data on his team. It was trying to really lean on what other countries who have already opened up schools have really tried to get at, and some of the things that we see in the LA County document. And frankly, it's going to be some of the same things that I expect we're going to see in the state guidance about trying to limit classrooms. This whole notion of trying to encourage almost everybody on a campus to wear masks. And I think LA County makes the distinction that adults should wear them. We should recommend them. We should strongly encourage them, I believe, is the language with kids. Acknowledging that some kids, it may be difficult, that some kids have unique health needs that will prevent them from doing so. And the things you talked about, Naj, the rethinking recess, obviously social distancing, the limiting the kids that are in each individual classroom. So all that to say, those components that the governor talked about now some weeks back actually are now pretty close to some of the guidelines that we're actually seeing in practice. And it just goes to show how much our worlds have changed, where that just seemed crazy, right? It's like, where is that coming from about split schedules? And now I think the work is happening. And I think credit to the LA County group that is comprised of a number of our members in consultation with the health experts, that nobody likes the recommendations that they're giving. No one would design school in this manner, but it's the world that we're living in and it's the parameters that we're living in. And I think folks are bending backwards to think about what is it that we can do to enable kids to come back to our campuses.
Well, and that's interesting. You talked about the health look at it and the science look at it, because, I mentioned screaming on Facebook about, there's this frustration about not having feedback from superintendents and principals about what is happening at the school. And I would say that if you haven't heard anything from your school district, that might actually be a good thing, because that tells me that they are relying on health and relying on science and taking their time and coming up with something substantive, because the last thing they want to do is put something out and then have to retract that and make changes because something changes 3 weeks down the way.
No, absolutely. And that's not to diminish that this is all going to be challenging, right? Like the fact of, and I think the report acknowledges this, that limiting the number of kids that you have in a classroom, the notion of having everybody wear a mask, really rethinking things like recess or field trips, or one of the things that I know is an open question, and we get a lot of the questions about, well, what about athletics and after school activities? And some of these questions are answered, and I think some of the guidance broadly talks about limiting it or reconsidering it. I think the state will likely go in the same direction, but I do think that we will get more guidance on this front. I know the CDC just recently put out some guidance on considerations for youth sports and after school activities. So I think the longer we go, we will get more of this. Now, again, and because we represent our members and we've been hearing this day in and day out, none of this happens magically. And this is an advocacy show that we're on. None of this happens without resources. Our folks are being asked to do more than they've ever done before. And the notion of doing that with less resources still gets me fired up. And I'll try to stay off the soapbox right now. But obviously, we're talking to our members, and they're seeing this firsthand in terms of what a monumental task it will be to put these new parameters in place. You need people, you need resources to do that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of stories out there. The Education Coalition, for which ACSA is a member of, and you know this, working on being able to deliver some of those stories out to the news coverage, because I think you are correct in we need to tell the story about the impact of budget cuts and the impact of some of these parameters, because you've had a role with the CDE reopening task force, but there was an article today in the Orange County Register, and Tony Thurman was in there, and there are a couple of things that I thought were interesting from what he said. Again, this is from the Orange County Register. He talked about an expectation that there will be face coverings, spreading students and staff out for social distancing purposes. It almost means like we're going to use every inch of this campus to put as much space in between people as possible. We're talking about smaller class sizes, fewer students on buses, a balance between distance learning and in-class, which projects to be some sort of hybrid, and then staff taking temperatures. Every single one of those elements, money and resources comes in, and that's got to be something that has to be talked about in the public. Yeah.
It's almost frustrating to hear some of the comparisons. You hear the discussion in the legislature about making some comparisons to the Great Recession, and I think for obvious reasons, right? That's the last time we saw this kind of downturn and how it impacted school funding. I think the biggest difference here is that that time it was a big hit to the system, and obviously hurt students because we had to let go of our educators. We lost a lot of our employees. Frankly, some of those educators never came back after the Great Recession. Now, the biggest difference now here is we're facing some of those same challenges, but now we're asking folks to do a lot more. And remember, this is not doing a lot more just because educators decided that we need to provide more services. This is to try our best to ensure the safety, the health and safety of our students, our staff, and yeah, we could go on and on, but that's going to require a lot of resources. So we're doing our best effort to try to educate the state, and there's limitations on what they're going to be able to do because the revenues are what they are, and they're not good. We are asking them to prioritize education, and that's tough because there's trade-offs there. And obviously, as we talked about in previous instances, that the federal government is going to have a big say here. If the federal government is able to come to some compromise in Congress and dedicate more resources to states and schools, frankly, we will be able to mitigate some of the impact of some of these reductions. And frankly, it will make the reality opening schools that much more clear. There's a lot of schools still continue to be unsure whether they will actually be able to open up, given the combination of these parameters that we talked about and limited resources.
ACSA came out with its school reopening call to action. And this was something that was driven by our members looking into so many different facets of what it would take to safely reopen schools. And that is the primary message here. It's not just this blanket, we're going to reopen schools when it's time for the academic year to begin. It's opening, reopening when it's safe. From your point of view, because every education organization was coming up with, their view of it, but from a substantive look at it, tell us about the process and what you feel like the finished product looks like as we move closer to the budget being decided.
Yeah. So for the last couple of months, our members have undertaken this work of thinking about reopening schools. And the project consisted of two facets. One is, what are some recommendations that we need to make to the state in terms of what is it that we're going to need in terms of opening schools? And the second part is a series of resources and documents and what we're calling scenario planning. A lot of the work that LA County was talking about and trying to lean on the best thinking, not just in California, but also around the world in terms of what are some of the considerations our folks need to take into account while doing this planning for opening of schools. On the call to action, kind of the main points there, and it really came down to 4 pretty simple concepts. It's one, that we need clear and uniform health and safety standards. And without that, our folks don't have the parameters to plan. And that's what we're hoping to get here with the combination of the CDPH guidance and CDE, that hopefully will address some of that need. 2, a really important one that we probably don't spend enough time talking about is that our folks moved with all deliberate speed to get distance learning up and going. We've heard from our parents, we've heard from our members talking about those Facebook posts. I know in some areas there's some frustration amongst folks with kids in the system that the system hasn't looked the same, that one third grade classroom could look very different, and that instruction sometimes has been somewhat different. So we do think that there is a role of the state. We don't want them to be prescriptive. We don't want them to spell out all the rules, but that there's some general uniform guidelines in terms of what are going to be the expectations for instruction if distance learning is going to be part of the equation, which it most likely will be in some form going into the fall. And then the second and third are the things that we've talked about, that our educators are going to need flexibility to innovate, that we can't operate under the same rules, whether it be attendance or instructional minutes, that there's going to be the need for a lot of flexibility to do the work that's going to be necessary. And then fourth, we could talk about it all day, the resource issue, that without the resources, we could plan all day long, but it's not practical. That our folks are just asking us. I see in the comments, it's like how are we supposed to do this without the legitimate resources? So that's kind of the 4 pillars of our call to action. And obviously the second part will be resources geared towards helping our members do some of the planning.
Well, and I think it's interesting that, we talk about how important guidance is over mandates. And Stephen Crockett, who's joined in, talked about, as a PE teacher, he'd appreciate some guidance in the content area, please. And there you go. You see it right there. And I think that that's important. People need to be innovative, have the opportunity to be innovative, because mandates aren't necessarily going to support the students in the best way. And I want to go to, because Lisa Salas Brown has a longer comment in here, but a part of it is voice is very important right now. See, it's live TV and my phone decides to go off. Those calls that just say United States for some reason. So Lisa Salas Brown says voice is very important right now. And that kind of leads us into this legislative advocacy work that needs to take place involving the storytelling from our members. And that's what ACSA is pushing right now.
Oh, well, Lisa, I'm glad I saw Lisa's comment, because it's a reminder, right? And we live this every day, but we're doing this work on behalf of our members, right? And it's really easy for folks in Sacramento and DC, and we have some great representatives, but I think it's really being grounded in what that reality is. So when I see comments like that, it is validation. I was like, no, don't calm down. We got to stay angry. We got to stay focused on what the task at hand is. So I appreciate actually that reminder. I think in terms of the next steps is that we got to do this advocacy. We were talking about the need for grassroots advocacy before COVID-19. The power of telling this story to the folks making those decisions, that the decisions that the folks in DC or Sacramento, or in this case, frankly, in our county offices and our public health offices, I've heard the complaint, maybe concern, that sometimes public health is creating some of their guidelines without them being grounded in the realities of educating kids, right? That it's one thing to have a guideline. How that looks in a first grade classroom is a whole other story. So I think for us, very simply, is we're going to be pounding, we can't literally be in the Capitol right now because of physical distancing, but don't get me wrong, we are influencing the process as much as we can. We're having strategic policy meetings with members from all over the state. We're calling on our members to contact their legislators. Right now is actually an easier time, I would argue, to get in contact with your legislators, because they are being accepting. I know a lot of our members have been able to schedule Zoom meetings with their legislators or with their staff. So I would actually encourage folks to just take that moment. We know you have your hands full. We know you have plenty to deal with, just in terms of either finishing up this school year or already planning towards the next. But even if it's taking those 2 minutes to shoot off an email or make a call to a legislator, if that was ever important, it's important now, just so we can help them ground their decision making in what the realities that our folks are facing.
As we get close to wrapping up our show, because I know your son is going to come running in, and as Ms.
when he hears us stop talking about budget is now, I think, his cue.
Well, and as Ms. King in our comment section, Ms. King, I don't want to mispronounce your name because I could write a book on the mispronunciations of Naj. But she wrote that it's a telemarketer calling, so I'm sure that the United States will be calling me again within the next couple of minutes. Hey, let's bring.
Maybe they're calling. Maybe it's the federal support that we were.
Hey,
for.
You know what?
Maybe you should have. Maybe you should have answered.
Maybe I should have answered. That would have been great for us to on the first edition of this show to have me actually take a call while it's going on. Hey, we want to bring in Michael Kelly, who's our video storyteller. Who anchors the Axon News, which is focused on positive stories. He's also the executive producer of this show, so he has the opportunity to cut us off when he's tired of us talking. Michael, what do you got coming up tomorrow evening on Axon News?
Well, look, before we go any further, I just want to clear the air. Edgar's son was paid by me a couple weeks ago for interrupting Edgar as many times as he did. I think it was about $5 per session. So just know that there's more of that on the way. Maybe we up it to 10 moving forward. In terms of what we've been doing over the last couple weeks, look, we just want to bring you the positive stories that are going on in California education. And there are so many of you who are doing phenomenal work. And it's a giant sandbox to play in, and we're just honored to tell really great stories. So we've got a conversation with a principal from Alice Burney Elementary, Jessica Gomez, who's wonderful. She talks about finding that work-life balance, but also the importance of fostering relationships during these really, really challenging times. And Naj, perhaps one of my favorite stories since we started this Axon News broadcast a couple weeks ago, a teacher going above and beyond the call of duty to make sure that his students were feeling safe and secure and relaxed prior to their AP exams. A nice little treat that he left for them at their doorsteps. We'll explain. That's all coming up tomorrow night at 5 o'clock across all of our social media channels.
Great, thank you, Michael, so much for doing that. I'm reminded, and my goodness, I am dating myself, even though I was never alive during this point. If I was, then I looked really good when the Huntley-Brinkley report, when Chet and David would say goodbye to each other, even though they weren't in the exact same room. So I'll bring on Edgar as we close out our first edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. This has been good, Edgar. I'm hoping that our viewers have enjoyed it, and I'll just say from
live TV.
Live TV. I'll say it from this side of Sacramento. Good night, Edgar, and good night to our viewers. Edgar, I'll let you close out the show. And I've apparently already said goodnight to Edgar, so I'll say thank you all for joining us and for your comments, especially the funny ones. We will be back here next Wednesday at 1 p.m. for another edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunchbox. Have a great day.